When we return, there's more to it. The sudden wave of heroin deaths, including the life of a Hollywood star, and why smack is taking hold on more Americans. Following up on our reporting last night about a shocking wave of heroin overdoses and the death of Oscar-winning actor Philip Seymour Hoffman, tonight we learn there is more to it. The wave of deaths, over 80 in places you might not expect. Places like Pittsburgh, Baltimore, even Rhode Island, seeing a recent surge in fatal heroin overdoses. We learned from the Centers for Disease Control that it turns out painkillers are more likely to kill than heroin, but it is still the #1 killer among illegal drugs. And so why is heroin use becoming more common, even in suburban communities? In part, it is a supply and demand issue. Opium poppy production doubled last year in Afghanistan. It's a prime producer. As a result, prices on the street are down. And adding to the danger, the stepped-up use of a synthetic opiate called fentanyl. Combined with street heroin, fentanyl is used by end-stage cancer patients, though 100 times stronger than morphine, so strong that an amount smaller than a grain of salt is enough to sedate a patient for hours of surgery. Resurgence is a surprise, but fentanyl has been on the streets before with heroin. Dr. Gregory Smith, a former anesthesiologist and current president of the Comprehensive Pain Relief Group, joins us tonight. Dr. Smith, talk to us a little bit about this. Fentanyl, it does have a very legitimate use for people in a great deal of pain, but obviously this way is adding to the incredible danger of heroin already.
Very true. Fentanyl has been around for a long time. Really came out in the 1960s, and I first encountered it when I was a resident about 20 years ago. And it's a very powerful opioid, very powerful anesthetic, and it's used in the operating room to put people to sleep and also for pain. And it's also used for chronic pain and for cancer pain in the form of patches and believe it or not, fentanyl lollipops. But it is a very, very potent drug, as you said, about 100 times stronger than morphine. And interestingly, because it's so lipophilic, meaning it dissolves in fat, it gets across what we call the blood-brain barrier very fast, and that's what makes it really deadly and stops people from breathing.
You know, we have heard so much about crack and use of things like Sudafed in the development of drugs. Is this that sort of a situation? I mean, how would the dealers get fentanyl into their heroin to begin with?
Yeah, that's a great question. Really, you have these labs, these sort of makeshift labs that get started, and they make this stuff in these bootleg labs, similar to the way that methamphetamine is made. And often what's happening is because it's cheaply made this way, you can cut heroin with it instead of cutting it with things that aren't necessarily dangerous. When it's cut with fentanyl, you can only imagine that the person injecting it or snorting it or smoking it is getting an enormous dose that they don't expect to get.
I guess part of this really is as we referred to earlier, supply and demand situation and a price point situation. Heroin turns out to be not a very expensive high.
Very, very true. In fact, with the prescription drug epidemic, which has gotten very expensive, heroin has become more affordable. And when you cut heroin with certain things, it becomes even more affordable. But the problem is the end user does not necessarily know what's inside that little packet of heroin, again, when they inject it or snort it. And it's very similar if you imagine if you were adding salt to a recipe, and it's the same amount of salt that you normally see, but the salt is 100 times stronger. Imagine how bad your recipe comes out. But here, we have a recipe literally for death when people inject this medication.
Do users understand this? I read one report from somebody who was taken after an OD, taken to a clinic, and he said, you know, look, my dealer told me this stuff was extra strong, not to even take all that I'd purchased from him. I'm struck by that someone would say, I knew this stuff was really strong, so that's why I bought it?
Yeah, well, again, your drug dealer is not a physician, and they do often know what's in it. They do know that it's stronger. But one thing is when an addict or someone that's abusing a substance is under the influence of the substance, they're not thinking straight. So what you have is people trying to feel better, trying to avoid trying to avoid being dope sick or trying to get a high. So often that advice to use less goes out the window, and if a person is alone, they can take this overdose and simply just stop breathing and die.
Truly tragic. Dr. Gregory Smith, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.